Imagine the Amboseli Basin in Kenya during the brutal drought of 1994. The ground is a mosaic of cracked clay, the acacia trees are stripped bare, and the heat is a physical weight that seems to stifle even the sound of the wind. In the middle of this wasteland, a seasoned African elephant matriarch, a creature with a memory that spans decades of human-inflicted trauma, does something that defies every rule of evolutionary biology. She walks directly into a human research camp, ignoring the fences and the unfamiliar sense of diesel and processed food, and gently nudges her collapsing, dehydrated calf toward a group of startled scientists. It's the kind of story that goes viral in seconds, usually accompanied by a soft piano soundtrack and a caption about the magic of nature or our special connection with the animal kingdom. We love these stories because they make us feel like we've been chosen, like animals possess a mystical radar for the goodness in our souls. But here is the cold, hard truth that most people aren't ready to hear. Everything you've been told about why animals bring their babies to humans is completely backwards. We've built a massive cultural myth around this behavior, a fairy tale narrative where wild animals recognize our innate compassion and reach out across the species divide for a helping hand. It's a beautiful thought, but it's a lie. Animals are not looking for a friend, and they certainly aren't looking for a spiritual connection. They are making a high-stakes, calculated gamble based on thousands of years of biological data, and the real reasons they do it are far more interesting and far more selfish than love. Which, if we're being honest, is a word we use mostly to make ourselves feel better about our own impact on the planet. If you want to understand the real mechanics of why a dolphin would push a tangled calf toward a boat, or why a stray cat would dump a litter of kittens on a specific person's porch, you have to stop looking through the lens of a Disney movie and start looking through the lens of a cold-blooded risk assessment. The first and most pervasive myth we have to dismantle is the idea that animals can sense a good person. You've heard it 1,000 times: dogs always know who to trust, or animals can see into your soul. Actually, the only thing a dog is seeing when it looks at you is a complex map of your current hormone levels and facial muscle contractions. The idea that animals possess a supernatural moral compass is a purely human invention. Research from the University of Lincoln in 2018, led by Dr. Daniel Mills, has shown that while dogs are incredibly adept at reading human emotions, they aren't looking for goodness. They are looking for predictability. They are tracking your cortisol levels, the scent of your sweat, and the micro-oscillations in your voice to determine if you are a stable resource or an erratic threat. When a wild animal approaches a human with its offspring, it's because they've identified you as holy. It's because you have passed a very specific, very physical audit of your threat potential. Which, by the way, is a much higher bar to clear than just being a nice person. Animals in the wild live in a state of constant, low-level hypervigilance. Every encounter is a potential death sentence. For an animal to override that instinct and present its most vulnerable asset, its genetic legacy, to a known predator like a human, it requires a complete recalibration of their threat model. Scientists often refer to this as the human shield hypothesis. In many cases, animals aren't bringing their babies to you because they trust you. They are bringing them to you because you are the biggest, loudest, and most terrifying thing in the area, and they've realized that predators like lions, hyenas, or sharks are even more afraid of you than they are. You aren't the savior in this scenario, you are the umbrella. You are a biological deterrent that other predators won't touch. Take the well-documented behavior of maternal dolphins. In 2013, off the coast of Australia, a dolphin known as Moko became famous for its interactions with humans, but the more striking cases involve wild mothers presenting injured calves to boats. We like to think they're asking for medical help. And sometimes, in a very narrow sense, they are. But more often, they are looking for a safe haven, a concept first pioneered by psychologist John Bowlby and later applied to animal behavior. The human boat represents a zone of safety where a shark won't strike. By placing the baby next to the boat, the mother is effectively outsourcing the job of protection to a species that is so dangerous no other animal dares to approach it. It's a brilliant tactical move, but it has absolutely nothing to do with the human's kind heart. It's about leveraging our reputation as the planet's apex monster to create a temporary sanctuary. This leads us directly into the second myth, the idea that this behavior is a modern breakthrough in human-animal relations. People see these videos on TikTok and think we're entering a new age of enlightenment where nature is finally starting to trust us. Actually, we've been having these interactions for as long as we've had a written history, and probably much longer. If you look at the writings of Pliny the Elder from the 1st century AD, you'll find accounts of dolphins in the Mediterranean helping fishermen and bringing their young to play near human settlements. These weren't enlightened dolphins. They were animals that had spent generations living in a state of low-conflict coexistence. The safe haven effect isn't a new development, it's a deeply ancient biological loophole. In a study published in Behavioral Ecology in 2014, researchers found that certain species of birds would intentionally build their nests near the nests of more aggressive, larger birds, or even near human dwellings, to use them as a protective umbrella against smaller, more frequent nest raiders. The animals aren't befriending us, they are exploiting our presence. When a bird brings an abandoned chick toward a human house, it's often because it has calculated that the risk of being eaten by the human is slightly lower than the risk of the chick being eaten by a hawk in the open woods. It's a triage decision, a desperate lesser of two evils calculation that we misinterpret as a gesture of love. Now, we have to talk about the myth of universal altruism. This is the belief that animals have a general instinct to seek help from higher powers when things go wrong. Which, let's be honest, is just a way for us to cast ourselves as the gods of the forest. The truth is that this behavior is almost exclusively limited to animals with high encephalization quotients, essentially, species with a lot of brain mass relative to their body size. We see this in elephants, dolphins, primates, and certain members of the crow family. These animals possess the cognitive hardware required for reciprocal altruism, a concept heavily studied by evolutionary biologist Robert Trivers in the 1970s. To a crow or an elephant, a human isn't just a random object in the landscape, we are a reputational entity. These animals have the memory capacity to track individual humans over years. In a famous study at the University of Washington, researcher John Marsluff found that crows can recognize and remember the faces of specific humans who have threatened them for over 5 years, and they pass that information down to their children. But the inverse is also true. If you are the person who consistently provides food or removes a tangled piece of netting, you aren't good in the eyes of the crow, you are a reliable asset. When a crow brings an injured chick toward a human it trusts, it is performing a transaction. It is cashing in on a long-term investment of non-threatening behavior. It's not a cry for help to a savior, it's a service request to a known contractor. Actually, if you want to see this in its most extreme form, look no further than the history of domestication. This brings us to the biggest myth of all, the idea that our pets bring us their babies because they love us like family. While there is a grain of truth there, the reality is much more about a biological hijacking that happened over 15,000 years ago. In 1959, a Soviet scientist named Dmitry Belyaev began a famous experiment with silver foxes to see if he could replicate the domestication of dogs. He didn't select for intelligence or beauty, he selected purely for tameness, the willingness to approach a human without fear. Within just a few generations, the foxes didn't just become friendlier, their physical bodies changed. They developed floppy ears, curly tails, and piebald coats. But more importantly, their brains changed. Their levels of serotonin increased, and their adrenal responses plummeted. This domestication syndrome created a species that is biologically incapable of the normal fear response that keeps wild animals safe. When a mother dog brings her puppies to you, she isn't just showing them off. She is responding to a massive surge of oxytocin, the cuddle hormone, that has been evolutionarily tuned to include humans in her natal circle. We didn't just befriend dogs, we rewired their fundamental social architecture so that they perceive us as part of their biological infrastructure. When they bring us their young, they are doing what their DNA has been programmed to do for 10 millennia. They are integrating the next generation into the resource-sharing unit. It's not a choice, it's an evolutionary mandate. But what about the truly wild ones? The ones that haven't been rewired by thousands of years of selective breeding? This is where the myth-busting gets really uncomfortable. We like to think that when a mother animal hands over her baby, she's doing it to save the baby's life at any cost. Which is a lovely sentiment, but biology is rarely that sentimental. In some cases, bringing a baby to a human is actually a form of triage abandonment. In the harsh reality of the wild, a mother often has to make a choice between her own survival and the survival of an offspring that is likely to die anyway. By leaving an injured or weak baby near a human, the mother is effectively releasing herself from the energetic cost of caring for a doomed infant while giving it a 1 in a million chance of survival with a different species. This sounds cynical, but it's a brilliant survival strategy. If the human saves the baby, the mother's genes continue. If the human eats the baby, the mother has already escaped and saved herself the energy of a futile rearing process. We see this in leaky distress signals. Research has shown that the cries of many baby mammals, from deer to seals, share a similar acoustic frequency that is almost impossible for an adult mammal to ignore, regardless of species. Humans are particularly susceptible to these frequencies. We have a caregiving bias that makes us respond to anything with a large forehead and high-pitched vocalizations. Actually, we're so easy to manipulate that researchers call this kinchenchima, or baby schema. Animals didn't learn to exploit this. They simply survived better when they did. The ones that accidentally left their babies near the weirdly helpful bipedal apes were the ones whose genes survived the winter. Which leads us to a fascinating point about how we, the humans, have been trained by the animals just as much as they've been trained by us. We often think we're the ones in control of these interactions, but we're actually responding to a series of biological triggers that we can't ignore. When an elephant stands over a calf and waits for a ranger, it is utilizing a form of interspecific communication that relies on our predictable response to distress. Over thousands of years, humans have built a reputation in the animal kingdom as the only predator that regularly behaves like a doctor. We are the only species that will pick up a broken thing and try to fix it instead of eating it. That reputation is a biological resource, and animals are smart enough to harvest it. If you're still clinging to the idea that these interactions are purely about a special bond, consider the case of cross-species alloparenting. This is a phenomenon where individuals care for young that aren't their own. We see it in chimpanzees, where aunts or older brothers will help a mother with a difficult infant. When a primate in a research setting or a sanctuary brings an infant to a human caretaker, they aren't treating the human as a god. They are treating them as an alloparent, a subordinate or peer who has been designated as a safe babysitter. In the primate mind, if you've spent enough time sitting quietly in their presence, you have been promoted to a level of social utility. You have earned the right to hold the baby, not because you're a good soul, but because you've proven you won't drop it or bite it. This brings us to a crucial turning point in our understanding of nature. We have to stop seeing ourselves as the center of the story. The myth that animals bring us their babies because we are special or kind is actually a very subtle form of human narcissism. It's a way of making the natural world all about us. But the reality is much more humbling. We are being used. We are being audited, tested, and exploited by species that are desperate to give their offspring any possible edge in a world that is increasingly hostile. Every time a wild animal approaches you with its young, it is a testament to their intelligence, not our virtue. It is proof that they have accurately mapped our behavior, calculated our threat level, and decided that we are a tool worth using. Actually, if you really want to honor that trust, you have to stop looking for the magic and start looking at the responsibility. Because while the safe haven effect is real, it's also incredibly fragile. The only reason these interactions happen is that we have, in very specific pockets of the world, managed to maintain a reputation for predictability. If we change that behavior, if we become erratic, aggressive, or overly intrusive, that entire evolutionary bridge collapses. The ledger of trust that we talked about earlier isn't something we're born with. It's something we're currently in the process of destroying or building, one interaction at a time. Now that you know the truth, that you're not a chosen one, but a calculated risk, it changes how you see every one of those viral videos, doesn't it? It's not a story about a special connection, it's a story about a species so intelligent that it can look at its greatest enemy and find a way to turn them into a protector. It's about the sheer, unyielding brilliance of maternal instinct. We like to think we're the ones studying the animals, but the animals have been studying us for 40,000 years. They know our habits, they know our weaknesses, and they know exactly which buttons to push to make us pick up a bottle of milk or a pair of wire cutters. So the next time you see a video of a deer bringing its fawn to a backyard or a whale presenting its calf to a boat, don't just say, "Ah," and move on. Recognize it for what it really is, a sophisticated, cross-species negotiation. Appreciate the cognitive heavy lifting that the animal is doing to overcome its own terror for the sake of its child. And maybe, just maybe, take a moment to ask yourself if you're actually living up to the reputation the animal thinks you have. Because they've made their bet. They've gambled everything on the idea that you are a safe haven. The question is whether you're going to prove them right or if you're just a predator they haven't seen hunt yet. The reality of these interactions is far more profound than the myth. By stripping away the magic, we find something much more impressive, a planet-wide network of intelligence where species are constantly monitoring, evaluating, and utilizing one another in a complex dance of survival. We aren't separate from nature, and we aren't above it. We are just one more variable in the equation, a very large and very dangerous variable that a few brave parents have learned how to solve. And honestly, that's a much better story anyway. It's a story of intelligence, adaptation, and the incredible lengths a mother will go to when the stakes are life and death. Now you know something most people don't. You're not the hero of the story, you're the tool the hero is using to save their family. Does that change how you'll act the next time a wild mystery shows up on your doorstep? If you're ready to challenge more of these comfortable myths we tell ourselves about the natural world, you might want to stick around, because the real world is always weirder than the one we see in movies. Which brings us to the final, most undeniable piece of evidence that will dismantle the last shred of your assumption that this is about love. We love to think of these moments as a pure interaction, untouched by the cold realities of data or history. We imagine that the animal is acting on a whim, a sudden feeling that we are a safe port in a storm. But that ignores the deepest root of this behavior, which isn't emotional at all, it's chronological. Consider the 15,000-year audit. That is the estimated number of years since the first gray wolves began the process of self-domestication by hanging around human trash heaps. For 15,000 years, we have been running a massive, planet-wide experiment on which animals survive near us and which don't. The ones that bring their babies to us today are the descendants of the ones who were smart enough to realize that we are a resource to be managed, not a god to be worshipped. But if you want the real smoking gun, the one number that proves this isn't about our goodness, look at the year 1971. That was the year Robert Trivers published his seminal paper on the evolution of reciprocal altruism. In it, he proved mathematically that altruistic behavior between unrelated individuals, or even unrelated species, can only evolve if there is a high probability of those individuals meeting again and again over a long period of time. This means that animals don't bring babies to humans, they bring them to you. They bring them to the human who has been in the same spot, behaving the same way, for enough time to become a predictable variable in their environment. It's not a spiritual connection, it's a statistical one. The magic you feel when an animal trusts you is actually the result of 30,000 years of data gathering that began the moment our ancestors first sat around a fire and a curious predator decided that the warmth was worth the risk of the spear. We have been being audited by the wild for 30 millennia. Every time you see a mother animal hand over her child, you are seeing the final result of a 30,000-year-old background check that we, as a species, are still barely passing. You aren't being chosen for your heart. You're being chosen because, for the first time in 30,000 years, you didn't reach for the spear. Don't break the streak.